So Jen?
Should we go ahead and start? Okay, yeah, just for the sake of time. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is the Intersections panel. It's part of a recurring series that's co-sponsored by the Critical Identity Studies program, as well as the Office of Spiritual Life. Several other programs as well.
Right, Cecil's office.
Yeah. Exactly, right? The Office of International and Intercultural Affairs. I'm Jennifer Esperanza. I teach in the Department of Anthropology, and today we have with us several panelists. We'll start here with Daksha Howard, who's the coordinator at the Office of International and Intercultural Affairs.
Actually, it's just Office of Intercultural Affairs.
Oh, or Intercultural Affairs, sorry.
But I used to be in the International Office, maybe that's why.
Yeah, maybe that's what's part of it. So, Intercultural Affairs. We've got Roxana Sanchez Avila, who is a junior and is majoring in both studio art and women's and gender studies. And then last here on the end is Milita Mihailovich, who is a Russian and German major, is a sophomore. What I wanted to do today is sort of like leave each of the panelists here first to tell their story. You know, this discussion tonight is largely about immigration and about their different experiences in various respects in terms of arrival, in terms of generations removed from the direct immigrant experience. And I wanted to actually start with a quote from one of my favorite writers, Junot Diaz, who is an American writer, a novelist, who won the Pulitzer Prize back in 2008. He's an immigrant from the Dominican Republic and moved to the U.S. when he was a young child. So he self-identifies as a 1.5 generation immigrant. And in a recent interview, he said, we have a lot of myths about immigration. We assume that immigration is a deficiency that can be overcome. We assume that there's some strange advance that one makes when one sheds this inadequacy to attain some sort of national purity. And the panel tonight is intended to challenge those various myths that he's alluding to about immigration and the myths of what immigration means. We'll start with these three panelists to share their stories, but the forum is meant for all of us to engage in a conversation, to ask questions and to share insights, and offer new ways to thinking about the immigrant experience and to honor those narratives. The country has a long history of being built and is still being built by the contributions of immigrants. But we're really living in contentious times where policies and practices and discourses against immigration and against immigrants themselves have been very hostile, one of the more hostile in recent memory. I don't know if you've been following the news regarding immigration reform, but lately Obama has come under fire. Some also naming President Obama as deporter-in-chief, largely because within his own presidency, the number of deportations has reached nearly 2 million. It's the largest number of deportation of immigrants, undocumented or in kind of limbo status within his administration alone. Nearly 2 million, right? And so it's important to think about what's going on during these times. So we'll start, I think, with each of our panelists to tell their story in their relationship to the immigrant experience, and then we'll proceed with questions. So we'll start with Dr.
Well, my name is Daksha Howard, and as Jen just said, I'm the coordinator at the Office of Intercultural Affairs. I was born in Uganda, East Africa, and and what's really interesting about my family is that my parents were born in Africa as well. So I'm 100% of Indian descent, but my roots are 100% African. So that's very different for people to understand that. My grandparents were the ones that came from India into Africa that was all part of the British, and the Great British Empire, and so what's really interesting about Indian people is that you'll see us all over the world because of the British influence in India. So we left Uganda when I was almost about 9 years old, and we emigrated. I don't even like to use the word emigrated, because we ended up in the UK as refugees. So this was in 1972, and some of you may know this and may have heard of Idi Amin, who was a crazy dictator and kind of woke up one day and had basically said that, he was going to give us Ugandan Asians, and that's what we're known as, Asians. When you're in the European continent, we are Asians, and I know that Americans are not used to that. When they think of Indians, or when they think of Asians, they think of something else. But anyway, so he woke up and decided that we no longer could live there, and that we had 90 days, we had to leave the country. Basically that's how, I remember my family was one of the last families actually to leave the village, and I was almost 9 years old, so I remember quite a bit, and it was very traumatic. It was very, very traumatic. So I was born in Uganda. I was there till I was 9, and then grew up pretty much in the UK, and came to the United States in 1988. So there's a lot more to it, but I'm going to let them.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I consider myself a Honduran-American second-generation immigrant. I guess it's not really my story, it's more of my mom's story. She migrated to the United States in 1985 with my father, and my father had been to the United States before, a few years before. He went back to Honduras, which is in Central America, and my mom, she's the oldest of 8 children, so she was pretty much raising her siblings, and she didn't have the best mom around. So my mom knew my father, and they're a few years apart. My father is way older than her, so she took the chance, and she's an ambitious woman still to this day, and she decided to come to the United States with him. And her story is it's a bit different than from what other people, I guess, because my father was he was a drug addict, and she was in an abusive relationship, so it was a domestic violence. So my mom pretty much stood by his side until all 3, I have 2 older sisters, until all 3 of us kind of grew up. And to this day, she works in an ice cream truck. So it's been about 28 years, and she's been there pretty much as my sister's father and mother. And I mean, with that, it's kind of interesting because she was in her early 20s, and I mean, as I said, I'm second generation, and sometimes I feel like I have an identity crisis, just because as a second generation, I've never been to Honduras, but I feel like I don't have a lot of cultural background. But then at the same time, I feel like I'm not American, because what does it mean to be American? We always hear that American means this melting pot, but what does that mean itself? We're all very different. So yeah, there's that, and trying to figure out, I guess, who you are. I guess me, especially as a second generation, I feel like sometimes my sister have that same thing, but theirs is a bit different. But yeah, it's been pretty much 3 women, 3 women that raised me, because I am the youngest.
I'm Malika, and as Jennifer said, I'm a sophomore. I was born in Serbia, and I immigrated to the United States in 1998 when I was 4 years old. So it's been about 16 years almost. So I consider myself generation 1.5. First, we kind of immigrated in two two groups. My dad and my oldest brother, who is 13 years older than me, they emigrated in 1997 so that my oldest brother could play tennis. He was on the track to be a pro, and now he teaches tennis and still his whole life. So they came in 1997, about a year before we did, and then a year later, me, my other brother, who was 7 years older than me, and my mom also, we all decided, let's go visit them. You know, it's been a year. We haven't seen the rest of our family. So we go over there, we get tourist visas so we can enter the United States, and we go over there, and this is when things really started to heat up in Yugoslavia with all the fighting and the bombing, and Belgrade was bombed soon after we left. So we're just like, oh, okay, never mind, we're not going back. Not yet. So, yeah, and kind of like Roxy, I have this sort of identity crisis. Like, anyone who knows me really well, like, one of the first things I will tell you is I am Serbian. Like, that is, I've convinced some people on this campus unintentionally that I'm an international student, like, because that's the first thing I mention and that's the first thing I stress. But that's how I feel when I'm here, when I'm in an environment surrounded by people who are not Serbian. Otherwise, when I'm with, let's say, like my family or with other Serbians, I just feel like I don't fit in, like I'm too American, just because I don't have that sort of background. When I go back to Serbia, I stay with family mostly. I'm staying with my cousins, my grandparents, and the majority of my family is over there, which is nice, but my brothers can go back and go see their friends and have fun and go out, whereas I just kind of don't have that. I feel like I'm missing that link almost, you know.
Thanks. And I guess I'll start by just following up, and each of you can answer in however way you'd like, is maybe first talk about, and sorry, just kind of go out of order for the questions I posed, but a lot of you said things that resonated with one of the questions here that I presented to you, which was, you know, how does your experience affect the way you think about place? How you think about how you even define home, right? So I can start with anyway. Sense of place.
Oh, well, I guess for me, sense of home is like wherever my family is. Just because, like, even though sometimes like I'm here and I'm like, oh, I miss home so much, but I guess it's always where like I'm able to easily have the access to go home. Like, being here, like, you have to take a 2-hour bus ride, and you have to get a 4-hour plane ride, and like, I don't know, sometimes I feel like I can't call Beloit home, because yes, even though I have relationships with a lot of people, it's still not that the same feeling of having, like, I guess for me it's also the idea of like easy transportation. Like, many people are from Chicago or from Milwaukee. You could easily drive there, you could get a bus, but I mean, I feel like coming from LA, a big city where you could easily take a train and be in downtown LA, like, you can't do that here. Like, you need to have a car, you need to have a friend with a car, you need to have a bike or something. And sometimes even public transportation like stops running like probably around this time, and like you can't really explore the city. But I guess, yeah, the family and transportation or easy access to that.
Yeah. To follow up, because you had said you've never been to Honduras, right?
Yeah.
And for myself, I'm I didn't even introduce sort of my story, but I'm second generation Filipino American. So my parents immigrated from the Philippines. I was born and raised in the United States. I didn't go into the Philippines until I was 23. So yeah, it was strange. So I don't know if, was there talk about Honduras as like home, but not really for you, or?
Not really, just because my mom has always been focused on working, and like she never takes a day off. Like, we tell her, oh, let's go to the beach. No, I have to go to work. I don't like going to the beach. And it's like, okay. So I mean, she's never really talked to us about home beside like her home. She never talks about it that way. She kind of talks about it like, you know, I was a nurse, you know, I was helping raise my siblings, and you know, your grandma, you know, she's a bad woman, but I still love her. And I mean, and my father, he never really spoke about Honduras. Like, I just know, like, he hardly ever spoke about himself. Like, he mostly would talk about, like, all I know is that he was a soldier during the Civil War that happened in Central America during, like, the 70s. Then I know that he was a police officer, and then that he had 2 other daughters with a Salvadorian woman. And, I mean, it's always been a very distant and chaotic place, and especially now, like, you know, with a lot of, like, the gang violence that's happening out there. And, I mean, my mom, she isn't a citizen, but she is under this thing called temporary protective status, and that was given during the 80s to many Central Americans because of the violence that was happening. And my mom was able to get it when she was here. She applied for it, like, in the early 2000s. And I mean, just recently my sister was telling me that they're actually going to be removing that program from Central Americans. So people will no longer be able to apply to this. So it's like, you know, people are being left with whatever conflict is happening in Central America. And I mean, I don't know if you guys been up with the news about Mexico. Like, there's a lot of gang violence there too, with the narcotraficantes. And I mean, it's just pretty interesting. Like, but yeah, it's never been a place that's really been talked about in a positive way.